They lit the match that changed history, and then history came for every single one of them. Here is how 8 men and 1 woman who assassinated presidents, kings, and revolutionaries actually died, and the true details behind each execution, escape, or collapse. Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly assassinated President John F. Kennedy in Dallas on November 22, 1963, firing from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository.
He was arrested within hours, hiding inside a nearby movie theater after slipping away from the crime scene, and was formally charged with murder not long after his capture. 2 days later, Oswald was being transferred from the Dallas City Jail to the county facility. Millions of Americans watched live on national television as he emerged from the basement, flanked by detectives, completely unaware of what was about to happen next.
Nightclub owner Jack Ruby pushed through the crowd of reporters and fired a single shot into Oswald's abdomen at point-blank range. The moment was captured live on camera and replayed for decades, becoming one of the most infamous pieces of footage in American television history. Oswald was rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital, the very same facility where Kennedy himself had died 2 days earlier.
Surgeons operated for nearly 2 hours, but the internal damage from the gunshot wound proved too severe to repair in time to save him. Lee Harvey Oswald died at 10:07 p.m., just 24 years old. Never one standing trial for the assassination that defined a generation. Ruby later claimed he shot Oswald to spare Jackie Kennedy the pain of testifying at trial, and was himself convicted of murder before he died of cancer.
That silence meant the only man ever charged with killing a sitting American president never got to explain himself in open court. It fueled decades of conspiracy theories that persist stubbornly to this day and will very likely continue to persist for many decades still to come. Nearly a century earlier, John Wilkes Booth, a well-known stage actor, assassinated President Abraham Lincoln at Ford's Theater. He shouted a famous Latin phrase as he leapt down onto the stage, then fled south through Maryland into rural Virginia, evading capture for 2 weeks. Federal troops finally cornered him inside a tobacco barn near a small farm after a tip from a local resident. His accomplice surrendered immediately once soldiers surrounded the building, but Booth, defiant to the very end, flatly refused to come out and face capture peacefully.
Soldiers set the barn ablaze to force him into the open ground outside. As Booth moved toward the door, a sergeant fired a single shot through a gap in the wooden slats, without any orders to do so, severing Booth's spinal cord and paralyzing him instantly from the neck down. For nearly 3 hours afterward, Booth lay dying on the farmhouse porch in the early morning light, completely unable to move his own limbs at all.
He asked the soldiers guarding him to lift his hands so he could see them, then whispered his final words, simply repeating "useless" twice before he died just after sunrise. To keep his grave from ever becoming a shrine for lingering Confederate sympathizers, the government secretly and deliberately buried Booth's body beneath the floor of a prison storage room in Washington, far from public view.
The exact location stayed hidden for years before his family finally reclaimed the remains for reburial. Decades before either killing, Charlotte Corday murdered revolutionary leader Jean-Paul Marat while he sat soaking in his medicinal bathtub in Paris. She stabbed him once through the chest with a kitchen knife she had specifically purchased that very same morning at a market located nearby in the city. She hoped the act would help halt the escalating bloodshed of the French Revolution then underway. She made no attempt to flee the scene, and just 4 days later, on July 17, 1793, Corday was executed by guillotine before a large public crowd gathered to watch her die. Witnesses said she climbed the scaffold appearing entirely calm and composed, showing absolutely no visible fear of the blade awaiting her. After the guillotine severed her head, an executioner's assistant lifted it from the basket and slapped it hard across the cheek in front of the shocked and watching crowd. Witnesses, including the executioner himself, swore afterward that Corday's face appeared to blush with visible indignation. That single reported moment sparked a full century of scientific debate over whether consciousness lingers, even briefly, after decapitation occurs.
Doctors, physiologists, and philosophers argued the unsettling question for generations. They repeatedly cited Corday's execution as their key piece of evidence, debating it in medical journals and public lectures well into the 20th century before interest finally faded. Charles Guiteau assassinated President James A. Garfield in 1881, sincerely believing that God himself had personally commanded the killing. He had been repeatedly denied a political appointment he felt he deserved and acted bizarrely throughout his highly publicized trial. On his execution day, Guiteau waved cheerfully to the crowd gathered outside to watch him hang. Before the noose was placed around his neck, he recited an original poem he had written himself, delivered in a strange, high-pitched singing voice that unsettled the guards nearby.
After his death, doctors secretly removed Guiteau's brain from his skull to study it for physical signs of insanity. None were ever found, and his preserved brain remains part of a medical collection to this day, still occasionally examined by curious researchers and historians. Leon Czolgosz shot President William McKinley twice at close range in 1901, motivated by anarchist beliefs he had absorbed after hearing activist Emma Goldman speak.
He showed no remorse whatsoever throughout his brief and highly publicized criminal trial that followed the shooting. Czolgosz was executed by electric chair later that same year. His final words were defiant to the very end, insisting he had killed the president because he saw him as the enemy of ordinary working people. And he offered no apology or any real regret whatsoever for what he had done that day. Authorities were determined that no physical shrine to Czolgosz would ever exist. They placed his body in a plain coffin and poured concentrated sulfuric acid directly over it, a corrosive so severe it reportedly dissolved the corpse almost completely, within roughly 12 hours. He was buried afterward in a deliberately unmarked grave located inside the prison grounds themselves, far from any public cemetery or memorial site. The exact location remained a closely guarded secret for decades, and unlike shrines built for other assassins, Czolgosz was deliberately erased by government order and by raw, corrosive chemistry. Gavrilo Princip fired the fatal shots in Sarajevo that killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie. That act directly triggered the First World War just weeks later, reshaping the 20th century in one violent instant. Because he was legally still a minor at 19, Austro-Hungarian law spared him from execution. He was sentenced instead to 20 years of harsh imprisonment at a brutal fortress where conditions were damp, cramped, and almost entirely unforgiving toward the prisoners held there. Princip's health deteriorated rapidly under prison conditions that offered him almost no proper medical care or basic nutrition whatsoever.
Behind bars, he developed a severe case of skeletal tuberculosis, a cruel disease that slowly consumed the bones from within his own body over the course of several long, painful, and agonizing years spent locked away. Eventually, his right arm, the very one he had used to fire the fatal shots that helped start a world war, had to be amputated in a desperate attempt to try to save what remained of his life.
Princip died of tuberculosis and severe malnutrition in 1918 at just 23 years old, reportedly weighing a mere 88 pounds. He was initially buried in an unmarked grave but was later exhumed and reburied as a national hero in what soon became Yugoslavia. His legend only grew larger in the decades after his death, even as the world he had helped set in motion continued spiraling further into deeper conflict across the entire continent. In St. Petersburg in 1881, revolutionary Ignacy Hryniewiecki took part in a coordinated plot to assassinate Tsar Alexander II. A first bomb thrown by an accomplice damaged the Tsar's carriage but failed to seriously injure the monarch himself. Against the urgent warnings of his own nervous bodyguards, the Tsar stepped out of his damaged carriage anyway to check on wounded bystanders lying in the snow nearby. Hryniewiecki seized the moment, shouting a defiant phrase before hurling a second bomb directly between himself and the Tsar. The resulting explosion tore off the Tsar's legs below the knee and simultaneously shredded Hryniewiecki's own body, badly wounding dozens of other bystanders caught within the surrounding blast radius as well, in one of the most violent assassinations of the entire century. Both the assassin and his intended target died from that single catastrophic blast in the street. The Tsar lingered for hours before succumbing to his wounds inside the Winter Palace, while Hryniewiecki died almost instantly at the scene, killed outright by the very bomb he had just thrown at his target. In 1960, 17-year-old ultra-nationalist Otoya Yamaguchi assassinated Inejiro Asanuma, chairman of Japan's Socialist Party. He stabbed him with a traditional short sword during a nationally televised debate watched live by millions of stunned viewers across the entire country. Because he was still legally a minor, Yamaguchi was sent to a juvenile facility rather than adult prison. He showed no remorse for the killing, sincerely believing he had acted honorably in defense of the emperor and the nation he loved above everything else in his short life. On the night of November 2nd, 1960, Yamaguchi mixed water and toothpaste to write a message on his cell wall, declaring he was giving 7 lives for his country and wishing long life to the emperor. It would prove to be the very last thing he ever wrote before he died. He then tore his bedsheets into a makeshift rope and hanged himself from a light fixture inside his cell, still only 17 years old. His death quickly turned him into a martyr for Japan's far-right nationalist movement, a legacy that quietly endures in certain circles, even now. Nathuram Godse assassinated Mahatma Gandhi with 3 point-blank pistol shots in New Delhi in January 1948 during Gandhi's regular evening prayer meeting. Dozens of followers had gathered peacefully in the garden that evening, unaware of what was about to unfold before them.
Godse was a committed Hindu nationalist who blamed Gandhi for weakening India during the violent partition from Pakistan. He was tried publicly alongside several co-conspirators in a lengthy, closely watched court case that captivated the entire newly independent nation. Godse used his own extended trial testimony to publicly and repeatedly justify the assassination at considerable length, addressing the court directly.
He insisted he alone bore full responsibility for it and was executed by hanging in November 1949 alongside one of his fellow co-conspirators in the assassination plot. He made one unusual final request before his death, that his ashes not be immersed in a river as Hindu tradition demands, but instead preserved until India and Pakistan were someday peacefully reunited as a single nation once again, undoing the partition entirely.
For over 7 decades since his execution, Godse's ashes have remained sealed inside a silver urn kept by surviving family members in the city of Pune. They are still waiting patiently for a political reunification that, more than 70 years on, has never actually come to pass at all, despite occasional calls from both sides for it. 9 killers. 9 names that reshaped entire nations in a single violent moment each.
Some died in silence, some in flames, and some were dissolved deliberately by acid meant to erase them from public memory, though history remembered them anyway. No execution, however brutal, and no unmarked grave, however hidden, ever truly closed the book on what these 9 people did. Their names outlived their bodies, for better or worse, and that's exactly why we still tell their stories today.